some schools in and around here are closed until the end of April, and people are really concerned, and especially with the ability to test for the virus. We got a very, very late start and a very slow when we did start. And you know, if you think about the test, you know, you can be tested today and next week you get the virus. So you probably need to be tested 2 or 3 times. And if that's everybody in the country, that's 1 billion tests, and we're struggling to make 1 million.
We're struggling to make 100,000.
Well,
not laughing. That's. I think they've run maybe 100,000 tests nationwide, and in China they're doing 100,000 a day or 10,000 a day, some huge number a day.
No, I think it's 10,000. We've done 10,000. We have 100,000 tests available, but they've only tested. They've only used 1,000, and what was it? South Korea does 10,000 a day.
Now, the issue of not testing means we don't know.
Yeah.
We know that there are some people out there with a problem. We know there's some people out there who have a problem and have died, but we don't know how many.
And we don't know how many people those people with problems have interacted with.
Right.
Yeah. And it's all over the world. You know, President said not going to accept anybody from Europe, with the exception of England.
With the exception of people who are Americans, who can come back and, oh, by the way, you get off the plane, you go kiss your wife, your kids, your aunt, your uncle.
And then go get tested.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure they're probably tested before they come back. I mean, you know, as they get here. But that's, you know, why make that exception for England? You know, because one person that came from England started, I think at New Rochelle or something, you know.
Oh, is that where the New Rochelle group came from?
I don't know. But somebody that did come from England is known to start something somewhere.
Okay. We like Boris Johnson.
No, I think we can defeat this virus if we put and make this as one of our highest priorities for this country to work on. And as a result of that, all your medical people need to be in there working, trying to come up with what is causing this and how we will work to get this change. I think this is the highest priority because right now America and the world is really afraid, and as being afraid is not a good thing. So we need to really, our country and the world need to really work on this issue.
Well, one thing
I think we do know what causes it. It's human interaction. You know, one person gives it to another, either through physical contact or breathing on them or something like that.
There's another factor. When I was actually driving to pick you up, I was listening to news, and they were saying part of the problem is that we don't have enough medical personnel, we don't have enough medical facilities, and what happened, I guess, in Italy, as much as anything else, was everybody suddenly got real sick, and there wasn't enough stuff to take care of them. And so people were saying, you know what, you're 80 and he's 20. The 20-year-old's got a longer life. We're going to put him on the ventilator. And you'll do whatever happens. There aren't enough nurses to care for people. Ultimately, it's not doctors who take care of people, it's nurses. And we don't have enough. We're closing hospitals throughout the country for a variety of reasons, but there are less beds. There's certainly less isolation places for people.
Now, people are afraid. It just seems to me that if our country said to those persons who have retired and who have skills, the doctors, the nurses, the other people who have skills, come back and help us work on this particular issue so that we can not only test people who need testing, but try to come up and find a solution.
Well, they claim, again, it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't, but they claim that they're getting some ideas. They obviously can start with the existing flu and try things that may work for the existing flu. I haven't heard anybody say, if you have a mild case of coronavirus, you take care of it by doing X, Y, and Z, or the hospital takes care of it by doing X, Y, and Z. So it would be kind of nice to know that as well.
Yes.
Obviously, if you're in respiratory distress, you need breathing aids. And we know we don't have anywhere near enough of those. And there's another factor that they were talking about in the news. Even if you're sick with something other than coronavirus, there's a limited amount of resources to throw at whatever it is. So you may die from something that has nothing to do with coronavirus, but because coronavirus, somebody who had it took that resource, now you aren't getting the care you need. So, excuse me, long term, we have to look at that. We can't be cutting back on things. We have to be looking ahead and saying excess capacity is not a bad thing.
Now this virus impacts more of the older people than it does the younger people. And in keeping that in mind, there are many, just as here, there are many persons who have retired, who have the skills. Get these persons to come back and help. They're nurses, they're doctors, they're social workers. There's a whole grouping of people who would be able to help. This town, for example, need to do a survey of how many people that can come back and help the town work on this particular issue.
Well,
what I'm thinking, and I think that sounds like a great idea in one respect, but then I'm thinking at the same time that that's one of the most concerned about people who are age 60 or older, who are the people that are retired. They're indicating to people at that age bracket to stay away from getting sick. Now, wouldn't that, by having them come back as in whatever capacity out of retirement to help, wouldn't that subject a possibility of more people getting ill?
I think you're right there, but I think those people that come back, quote, know how to take care of themselves much better than the average person does. And the other question is, it's another issue. It comes down to money. Do you pay them, or do you ask them to work for nothing? To volunteer their time. That's pretty tough. Why don't you go into this very dangerous place, but we're not going to give you any money to do it.
Well, Margaret, you are a retired nurse.
I am a retired nurse.
You volunteer with the town,
Yes.
public health. It's basically what she's talking about.
Yes, that other persons can volunteer to help the town out. When you look at it, the options are we find a cure and work to help our people, or the other thing that we have been told about is that you isolate yourself, and that makes you really worse. If you're in a place by yourself, or your spouse, and how long does this go on? So we got to work to change this.
Well, you're talking about a long period of time. Does, assuming we can get the antidote or whatever it is to in some number of months, 4, 5, 6, then they have to run a test that's going to take several months, and then they have to verify the test, which takes another several months. They're talking a year and a half before they'll have a vaccine.
And then you have to ramp up production, and then you have to figure out how to get it to the people who need it.
Well, yeah,
It's
the vaccine is good for people who haven't been sick yet,
Yeah.
not for people who have.
well, we're assuming that this is something that you can't get twice.
I heard
If you
it.
can get it multiple times, the flu you can get multiple times, whether it's the same strain
Well,
or not, I don't know.
They're various. I was asking that question too. Is it something that you can get sick, get better, and then get sick with it again?
I heard a doctor talking today on 2 different shows. It's the only time I've seen him. I haven't seen him before. He just came back from someplace overseas, and he said what they were doing at this place overseas was they were using blood plasma. Now, I'm not a medical person at all, but he was saying they were injecting people who had coronavirus with the blood plasma. That they were taking the blood plasma from people who had the coronavirus and had no longer had it, and they were taking blood from them and injecting it into people who had the coronavirus, and they were having tremendous success.
I would be scared of that.
And he said that that we used to do that before we had all these antibiotics, and so it's not a radical thing to do. And they seem to be having. He says you can do it tomorrow if you can find. And he says you can. Any person that donates the blood can treat 3 people that have the coronavirus.
I don't know.
I don't know enough about it, but he talked for a little while on 2 different shows. I haven't seen anybody else talking about that or read anything about it, so I don't know how feasible that is to do.
And you have other problems. If I have one particular blood type and I try to give my blood to somebody who has a different blood type.
Sure. Yeah, but I'm sure they would,
Right.
They would make sure the
so
right ones.
it goes on and on. In theory, I suppose it makes sense, but you'd have to test it.
No, yeah. How would it work with AIDS?
I don't know. That's a good point.
I
They don't have a.
I would think it would kill the recipient, or not kill him, but
Or maybe if you give it in a small enough quantity, maybe the body can figure out how to deal with it before.
Are you saying that somebody who has AIDS donated the blood, or
Yeah.
they were? Well, I would imagine that would be They would be
right.
They would be eliminated
So,
from donating.
But it also, I thought you were taking it from the other point of view. Here you have the AIDS virus, HIV virus. Could you cure AIDS the same way? Again, I don't.
No, I
don't know.
was thinking about someone with AIDS, just donating blood to somebody that didn't have it, and now
So now,
I mean, when you go to donate blood, and Margaret could speak much better than I can, but I've donated blood a number of times, but they certainly ask you a lot of questions
Yes, they
before they
do.
let you donate blood.
right.
And no one ever lies.
Well, again, you have to hope that that they're being truthful.
Yeah. But how many people die if they're not, or if they just don't know? Everybody gets exposed to all kinds of stuff during the course of their day, and you may or may not be aware of what you've been exposed to.
now the families, when things close, like the school system closes, and suddenly the family who does not have anyone to take care of their children have to go out and start looking for someone to help take care of their children.
Right.
And so there would be a lot of depression and a lot of anger that starts. The anger will be, why don't we know at this time why this is happening? Why haven't we investigated and a long way to see, can something be changed? So our focus really needs to be working to see, besides the taking donation, working to see whether we can suddenly find a cure for this that's impacting so many people. It's impacting the elderly, or because they are asked to stay at home and not go out. So they're impacted, and it's just impacted.
I got this, Michael?
You did your shoulders. That's
Yeah,
good.
My wife will be so proud of me.
So this really is something that we need to work on and try to get this changed and get this done. So the fear that people have now, and that's bringing on depression, we need to help with that.
Well, excuse me. This will not be the last of whatever we're
No.
dealing with. It certainly isn't the first.
No.
We don't have to go back all that far in history. Ebola was something that almost took over the world. We were kind of lucky that it was fairly isolated to start with, and B, if you weren't sick, you weren't infectious. This is different. You're infectious whether you're sick or not.
Yes.
And even if you're going to get sick, you're infectious before anybody knows about it. Excuse me, including yourself. So we do have to find another way. And you're right that if the way is to isolate yourself from the world, we know that that is not good for human beings. We're social animals. And I know when you're dealing with the elderly, one of the key things that happens to them when they become isolated, they get sick.
Yeah.
And the mind and the body don't work well in isolation, so we do have to find other ways.
Well, many of the things I've heard is saying restricting groups of 250 or more.
Right.
I
So it's not restricting groups of small as we are here, or if no one has any illness of this sort.
Well, in Italy, they're telling you, don't be on the street. I was, again, listening to the radio earlier today, and some guy was a chef. They closed all the stuff. His restaurant closed. Okay, fine. I mean, he then went back to the restaurant to get some food out of the freezer because If it was just left there for months at a time, it's probably going to rot. Might as well bring it home and eat it or give it to somebody. He was on the street carrying the meat that he had taken out of the freezer, was arrested by the police for being on the street and fined 50 euros. A lot of money, particularly for somebody who just lost their the means of income. We don't live in a society that allows for that. Maybe if I was a farmer out in the farm and the only people I saw were the same people I saw all the time, and as long as they weren't sick, I wouldn't be sick, and I could go on and do my life. But then again, if I ever wanted to sell my crop, suddenly I'm put in contact with other people.
Well, from what I understand, the problem in China is supposed to be improving. And so I'm not sure how many months that's been in total right now that this first, I mean, I don't know how much we can actually believe what we hear that comes out of China at the same time.
It's improving, but you know, they have somebody measuring your temperature every 2 hours. Everybody. And they're doing that. You're confined to your own house, and people come around and take your temperature every 2 hours.
You got a lot of people to check on every 2 hours.
Think about that.
Well, let's assume for the time being that what we're told out of China is correct. In the same way, let's assume for the moment that what we're told out of Washington is correct. Because we do know that the high-level briefings are considered classified, highly classified. So who the hell knows what's being hidden, what isn't?
But we know what's coming out of Washington isn't true. So I mean, we can't assume that. We know it.
Okay. Well,
I mean, you know, they just say things that are blatantly false.
Obviously I don't agree with that. I mean, there may be some things that aren't quite explained properly or something, but I don't think there's any real intent to blatantly lie.
Oh, I do.
You could say that somebody is
do,
woefully ignorant and opens up their mouth and spouts out totally inaccurate stuff, but in fact you can show, for example, President Trump, what was it, a week and a half ago, was saying there's 15 cases of the coronavirus in the United States and most of these people are getting better, and so poof, it'll be gone.
Well, I don't think anyone believes that. And, you know, I think they are saying things that because they're worried about the stock market, and the people in the stock market aren't listening at all, and they're just doing a major sell-off. And the things that they had in reserve to guard against this major sell-off was the Fed creating money, and they did that last October. They also lowered interest rates down to where they're almost non-existent. So the things that would have helped the economy, they've already done when we had a good economy, and now they're out of tools in their toolbox.
But I don't think that that's the way to go anyway. Yeah, you can protect a corporation or a company, but if you want people to have money in their pocket so they can spend it, don't you have to have the ability for that person to get out of their house to go spend the money, or to get the stuff that they bought delivered? And what we're saying is the way to slow down the virus is for everybody to hunker down, not go out. And we don't have robot delivery yet. So monetary issues aren't going to help short term. What's going to help short term is for people to be able to go out like they're doing right now in, I know in Billerica because I've been in the Demoulas up there twice today, there are unbelievable lines because those people are afraid. Number one, I got to stay home. I've got to get food in the house. Makes a little bit of sense. And B, maybe they're going to close down the grocery store, either because it's called for or the workers either get sick or are afraid to come in. So everybody's loading up. And monetary policy isn't going to help there. Certainly not going to help to give a tax holiday to some guy who doesn't have a paycheck.
Yes,
He's not paying taxes anyway.
But people right now, today, really are frightened because you see that the stock market is losing so much money, and that impacts on many people, including mine. It impacts on many people's pension. And so people are really afraid. So now they have two things to worry about: the virus and that their pension being reduced by the stock market, because the general population does not believe that we are moving fast enough to get answers to what the needs are.
The problem with the stock market was it wasn't based on fundamental values. They had so many puts and calls that you put 10% down, expecting it to rise or expecting it to fall, and when it did, then you had to make up the other 90% yourself when you guessed wrong, and lots of people were running out of cash trying to make up the difference.
I can't seem to remember things that happened in the past as well as I used to, but I didn't realize, and I just was reminded in the last earlier today that when the 9/11 happened, that the stock market was shut down for 7 or 8 days.
Yes.
Now, is there a sense to do that now? Does that make sense for them to have a shutdown of the stock market to relieve some of that anxiety people have?
It would have been good to do it a week ago.
Yes.
Well, you can always have hindsight, but
Maybe,
But first
maybe
you have to recognize you have a problem. And we were
And-
talking.
And the word is that we don't have a problem.
We
That
don't?
that was the
That's the word,
That was
huh?
the word. We don't have a problem. Everything's going to be fine. And then nobody believed it.
Well, they believed it short term. Market went up. And then suddenly the facts came out. We were talking a little bit earlier about what is truth, what is fact. Then one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier was we don't know what the extent of the problem is. And if we don't know what the extent of the problem is now, we sure as hell don't have any idea of the extent of the problem tomorrow. And one of the advantages of not having testing kits is that you can fool yourself and say, nah, it's not that bad. I don't know anybody who's got the coronavirus. He dropped dead a little while ago, but that was pneumonia. That had nothing to do with the pneumonia virus. And he's lying in a hospital bed, but that's not, no indication it's the coronavirus. When you find out, hey, this is real, and it's happening to the guy who dropped dead and the guy who's in the hospital ward, then you start getting scared. And if you believe what your leadership, who is supposed to know all this stuff, says, then you don't prepare. And then you're standing in line with 100 other people at 10 registers trying to get enough food to last a week.
I agree with much of what you just said, but I've heard, and I've been guilty as most people, that I've heard for years though that everybody should have about a month's supply of food in their house.
Right.
But I bet you the percentage of people that do that is so small, and I guess relate that to the aspect of going back to what we said earlier as far as the country not having all these supplies at hand. I think it just is the way of human nature that we don't prepare well enough and stay prepared, because we just, just don't want to believe that things will get so so bad.
But that's short-term thinking, and this is something, we used to be a little more long-term thinking. We used to invest for the future. Now, if I can't get a return in a couple of minutes, then I start panicking and cursing and whatever.
One of the problems with having a supply of food for a week is it's like 30% of the population doesn't have $400 that they can spend
for the future.
They just simply don't have it.
I don't deny that's probably true, but I wonder at the same time when I hear that and I think about that, how many of these people who don't have that, not again, I don't know what the percentage is, they don't have that because they waste their money on buying things that are short-term things they buy. It doesn't seem like there's a shortage in this country for every. It seems like everybody has a cell phone. It seems like everybody's got 2 or 3 televisions in their house, and multiple types of things that are materialistic. And they got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, and so they keep going out and buying. They don't worry about tomorrow, and that's why so many of them, not all of them, but so many of them don't have $400.
Yeah.
Well, also, stuff happens, and our society, although some people seem to think we're a mama kind of society, doesn't provide a safety net for somebody gets sick. You had a stent. You weren't planning on having a stent. You had a stent. Luckily, you have insurance and decent health, etc., so you were able to survive it. There are people out there who are going along, making it, sort of, and that kind of an expense would kill them. They're done. They may never recover.
Yeah.
Whether it's because they're not willing to put money in the bank or other things are a priority, sending a kid to college or some trade school or some advanced education or whatever is more important. And who are you to say that helping your kid is more important than putting some money in the bank for something that may or may never happen?
Well, my examples I used had nothing to do with putting money in the bank or getting your kids to school. I'm talking about so many people are materialistic about things that they buy.
Yes.
And they got to have the fanciest car that's out there. They've got to get the newest car every 2 or 3 years. All these kind of the biggest house on the block. They really can't afford it without jeopardizing other parts, and they don't seem to worry about it.
Yeah, those are not the people that can't come up with $400.
Well, I don't know. They
The
can
people
make.
that can't come up with $400 are people that are in the inner cities, and there's millions of them, and they're living, hand to mouth, and maybe some of them are wasting money on drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or something like that, but they have children, and there's just an overall problem with the distribution of wealth in the country.
Yes.
There are 150 families, probably a lot more individuals, but 150 families who qualify and make use of the Burlington Food Bank. This is Burlington. We're not the wealthiest town in the world, but we're not by any means some place that you'd be afraid to go at night. It's everywhere.
Now, about the stock market, what does our leadership say about the stock market and the way that it is going? Do you have any information?
They believe, the leadership believes, that the stock market is a indicator of how well the country's doing. So if the stock market's doing well, that means the corporations that represented on the stock market are doing well, and therefore the country's doing well. New York Stock Exchange trades stock and companies that have nothing to do with the United States, except that they want to have some of the investment money that the United States has available. And the stock market is based on not so much how you're doing right now, but what they think is going to happen tomorrow. And
yes, but many people pension or will be impacted about by the stock market.
yes,
And that's fearful.
yes. Different people see things from different standpoints and come to different conclusions.
That's true.
There are people out there today who see what's going on right now as a buying opportunity and are trying to time when do people get tired of selling, and that's the time when they're going to take advantage of the opportunity and buy stuff that used to be real expensive is now cheap.
And you can see it if you watch the just the Dow Jones going up and down by several hundred points in a couple of minutes. You know, I was watching and it was down, and then it couldn't be more than 10 minutes later, it was up almost 500 or 600.
Yeah,
You
there
know,
were two factors there.
So all of a sudden, people started, you know, because it was down so far. I can't remember the numbers. I'm just going to use. I'm going to invent some numbers to give an example. It was down 1,800. Okay, and then 10 minutes later, it was only down 1,200, and then 30 minutes later, it was down 1,500, and you know, it kept going like that.
Yes.
Those kinds of deviations on a normal day would have been unthinkable. You know, it goes like 20 or 30 on a single day, and so there's plenty of investors going in and out on an hourly basis, so more than a monthly basis or a half-year basis.
There's also, and this is one of the things that's different than it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, there are computers that are situated as close as possible to the computer that actually keeps track of actual trades. And they're programmed to look for trends. And if they see the trend, they immediately react by buying or selling huge amounts. And in some cases, that's why something will be dropping like a stone, and all of a sudden it'll shoot up 0.5% in the whole market. The computers are kicking in. Why do they have to be so close? Because the fraction of a second difference between when they reach a conclusion and act and the next computer down the line means that they make a better profit.
Yeah, they're talking about the difference in speed of light depending on the distance. You know?
Yes.
I saw that.
People are paying unbelievable amounts of money to get that much closer.
So how many people pensions will be impacted by what's going on now?
Everybody's pension will be impacted to some extent, good or bad.
Not good. Right now it's bad.
Well,
The key is if you can hang in, not all the stocks, but most of the stocks will go back more or less, maybe not to where they were 2 weeks ago, which was crazy high anyway, but to a level that you could tolerate.
I mean, some of the stocks that are going up and down and may not, depending upon an individual person, may not be personally affecting somebody as much, obviously, as others, because you may have very conservative stocks that you have in your portfolio versus somebody having very aggressive stocks. So it may be not as much of an impact.
And it's also what it was. I had Lehman Brothers back in 2008. It never came back, you might note. But most of them did.
You can see the price of oil when Russia and Saudi Arabia were trying to reach an agreement, and Saudi Arabia said, "The heck with you," and dropped the price by $30 a barrel.
You know, that just made the situation a little worse.
Yeah,
Well, that was
Right.
done deliberately. They were
right.
trying to see whether they or Russia would blink first. Russia's trying to screw our fracking oil industry, which is what's driving the overabundance of oil. If they can drive them out of business, then the price will naturally shoot way up. And Russia is absolutely dependent upon the price of natural fuel for their economy. Saudi Arabia is also dependent, but Saudi Arabia's got more, a great deal more in the bank. So it's not clear who's going to win that.
Saudi Arabia will win that one.
Well, I saw an
Because-
article which made a lot of sense to me. Russia is betting because I think 40% of their economy is based on oil revenues, and Saudi Arabia is 80%.
Oh.
Now, if they're going to fund all the things that, it's like Venezuela. Everything was going great in Venezuela, and people were stealing, but it didn't matter because everybody was getting their share. And then the price of oil dropped, and suddenly there wasn't enough to go around. And the people who were stealing said, "Hell, I'm not giving up anything." And the whole place went to pot. If Saudi Arabia is willing to get to that point and still make sure their people are cool, they'll probably win. If not,
Saudi Arabia can get the oil out of the ground for $5 a barrel.
I thought it was a little higher. But yeah,
Yeah, it's unbelievably low because it's right there. You know, they don't really have to do much to get it out of the ground, where other people have to go find it and get it out of the ground.
but then again, when the price of oil drops, somebody loses something. And the question is, are you willing to share the load, or do you take yours and leave all the other guys, screw you?
Your comment, I think, was correct. They're talking about the fracking guys going out of business.
When they go out of business, now the United States is no longer the
Anyway,
cheap exporter. Russia has that much more influence, and we get hurt a little bit more.
Have any thoughts been given on where this country is headed?
In what regard?
In financially, in being trustworthy of each other? Are we headed in the right direction?
Personally, I think we're not, but I don't know how other people feel.
We have I believe that we have the strongest economy in the world
You
at the
believe
present
that?
time. I do. Looks like Paul has something.
I sort of tend to agree with you. I think financially we'll be okay, but individuals may not be, because individuals right now aren't. Some are fine, some are extra fine, some are not very well off. But as far as with each other, I see groups drifting apart as opposed to coming together, and that bothers me.
Why do you think that the economy is so strong?
I didn't say it was strong.
Well,
Oh, I
okay,
didn't.
Chuck did.
It's the best one around.
But,
I had one of the things, and I'm not an accountant, I'm not a business major, but I've dealt in business enough as a computer guy. One of the key things that every business requires is customers. What is a customer? Customer is somebody who's ready, willing, and able to buy whatever it is you're trying to sell. If the customer doesn't have any money, he doesn't do you any good. He may lust after that beautiful, beautiful car, but there's a triple pane window between him and that car,
Yes.
and it's never going to get any better. Henry Ford, for all of its bad things about him, said if he built a car that the people who built the car could afford to buy, he'd be way ahead of the game because he'd have all these customers. And so he paid a living wage. He also paid a living wage because he didn't want to see unions in his shops, which is a different story entirely. But that was the net result of understanding he needed customers. When we are not, and to your point that you were making a little earlier, if in fact the majority of the country can't afford to buy that car isn't going to get sold. There isn't going to be work for the guys who make it, and the people who own the car company aren't going to make any money either.
Right, but not everyone buys the high-end car. That's why there's a huge variation.
I'm not saying that it has to be the high end. It has to be a car. There are a lot of people in this country who can't afford a car. Period.
Right,
End of story. And if they could afford the down payment on a car so they could drive around with something they can't afford, making the payments every month with tremendous interest costs, they can't afford the insurance. They can't afford the gas. They can't afford the repairs.
My son's involved in the car business with BMW, and I frankly I can't. I'm blown away on how many BMWs that are getting sold on a regular basis, and I think that it's still being sold.
Oh, wonderful!
I had contact with through somebody that he works with earlier today, and they're getting registered still in spite of whatever's going on in the stock market. I thought business would have fallen off the last few days, but didn't seem to be any. So there's people out there with money.
Yeah.
And I live in Reading, and the homes in Reading continue to sell for big money. Right, they're out there in the market just in the last few days. I don't know if these, in the neighborhood I used to live in, I'm in a condo now. There's a house for sale now that a former neighbor of mine said that house is going to be into a bidding war, and they're asking over $600,000 for that house, and it wouldn't look like it was necessarily a $600,000 house to me.
So does this mean that only the poor and lower middle class people are impacted by the economy now?
Well, everybody's impacted. Some are more than others. In my neighborhood, surrounding me, within a couple of 100 yards in various directions, they're buying houses, tearing them down, and putting up houses at $8, $9, $1 million. There are people out there who have a fair amount of money, or think they have a fair amount of money. They may or may not. But to your point of saying, okay, they're trying to live well beyond their means. But the bank's willing to lend them a couple of bucks.
Well, the interest rates have gone down on mortgages the whole period of time also. I think that's encouraging. I think it's down to 3% or something. So there's a lot of encouragement for people to go out there and refinance.
Yes,
Yeah, that's a function of what I was complaining about earlier, where the Fed keeps dropping it, and then they lend money to the banks, so the banks can lend that out and get interest on it. And the multiplier right now is a factor of 10. So the Fed creates a $1 trillion. It winds up being $10 trillion that didn't exist, 10 minutes ago. As far as one of your comments about people with money, I was a real estate appraiser for a while back in the early 2000s, or mid-2000s. And I saw an awful lot of houses. And I came away with the conclusion, boy, there are a lot of people with a lot of money. I didn't realize. And my daughter-in-law is working on a development where it's a side-by-side condo, and they're going for $600 apiece. And you know, it's a 2 floors, very, very nice. And people aren't financing them; they're coming in with $600,000 in cash and buying it. You know,
So we still have
that
some wealthy people.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely flabbergasting.
Either that or they're getting their money from Deutsche Bank.
Some of them live in Burlington.
Burlington still, I mean, I don't live in Burlington, but
No, I'm
everything-
talking about moving from Burlington to this other place and
Oh,
laying down $600 in cash.
Burlington is still expanding, and
Yes.
I mean, their tax rate is somewhat on the lower side than some of the other neighboring towns because of all the businesses and.
it has been a well-managed town for a long, long
Yes.
time.
You drive around, you know, Burlington, Wilmington, Billerica, you see what Bob's talking about. They buy a lot with some kind of a structure on it. It's gone within 2 days, and up pops $1 million house.
Yeah, I mean, my house, I get letters and emails all the time saying your house is worth some strange amount of money. And I know, because I know the house, I've lived in it for 50 years, it is not, it will be torn down. And everybody in the neighborhood will cheer. And it will be replaced with some kind of a McMansion. And yeah, the money's somewhere. Whether that same person who put down some money a week ago can come up with the rest of the money tomorrow, I don't know. But nobody plans for what we're dealing with right now. Okay, question. We survive what's happened somehow or another. What do we do? What do we do next? Do we plan to make sure it doesn't happen again? Do we go to church and say, thank you, God? Give me another one of those $1 million mansions? What do we do?
I think we do both of those, but in addition, we need to plan. We need to plan not only for our behavior, but for others who are not as well and is still feeling that they can't get ahead because they're poor, they're many things. And I think we need to become a country or a state or a town that we try to look out for each other and help each other.
Okay. How do we do that? We've seen our neighbors go through all kinds of bad things in the past. It hasn't seemed to help a great deal in terms of today. We found, some have found somebody to blame for all this. It's those nasty Mexicans or whatever coming across the border. Oddly enough, we never hear about them having the coronavirus. Wonder why.
They don't have people visiting them.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, what about Brazil? You know?
I don't know.
Brazil's got it big time.
Oh, it does. I hadn't.
Yeah, as a matter of
hadn't
fact, one of the Brazilians was came north and to Mar-a-Lago and was shaking hands with Donald Trump,
heard. Okay.
known to have the virus. So now Trump is worried.
No, I haven't heard anything about him
Oh,
being
yeah.
worried. He may be, but I don't think he would express that he's worried. Yes,
No. That's what I'm saying. I'm sure he's worried now.
Well,
Now that he knows that this guy had the virus and he shook his hand,
no, he might be concerned. I'm not sure
Yeah.
whether between
probably
being concerned or worried.
would run to the bathroom and wash his hand. Wash his
Well, you
hands.
can do that anyway. He said
Yeah.
he's a germaphobe, and which is kind of tough for a politician in our world,
Mm.
because you're supposed to love everybody.
Yeah,
Maybe not to Joe Biden's extent, but you're supposed to love everybody.
I thought the Congress was supposed to work over this weekend to try to find a solution to the problem.
I know
Yeah.
that
Their
McConnell was
problems.
saying that he wasn't going to call the recess.
Oh, they're
Well,
gone.
They're gone. I know they
The
closed the Capitol, but
The
I
Senate's
thought
gone. The
I
Senate's
thought they
gone for the
closed
weekend.
it for
The Senate is gone for the weekend.
really.
Yep.
That's interesting because McConnell publicly said we need to get this done.
Maybe he didn't like what the House
Democrats?
came up with.
Could be, although it was bipartisan.
Well, I know there were some issues they had some disagreement with on, but I don't remember what they are specifically.
Well, there was one thing that I didn't understand. Maybe you listened to different commentators. The Democrats wanted to give immediate relief to people who couldn't go to work through unemployment. And there was some question as to whether the way they were going to do it through unemployment would take a couple of months to happen, and that wouldn't do any good for the guy who doesn't have his paycheck today, might have it tomorrow. But I didn't understand it. They didn't.
I don't know.
The article I read did not explain, because that was the House's Republican leader who had that concern. But at the same time, he also approved the bill that the House ultimately passed. The other thing I heard was that Trump, who had originally said, "Yeah, I'll support that," is now saying, "Maybe I'll veto it."
I
Well,
don't know.
What Trump wanted was a hiatus on the payroll tax,
Which generally is considered
Social
to be
Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
So he wants to cut those out.
For the balance of the year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, there's a problem with that is the Medicare and Social Security is self-funding. If you cut their income and increase their outgo, they'll go broke, which is what some of the conservatives have been saying forever. We can't do this. We have to put all the money in the stock market where people can make rational choices, like with their pensions, as you were talking about. I thought after 2008 that idea that, oh, the stock market is the way to go would have lost favor, but evidently not.
I don't know. I don't have enough thoughts about that knowledge about that to be able to comment.
Well,
So.
but again, just in terms of healthcare, let's not worry about kumbaya and we're all in this together, etc. But what can the country do to prepare for the next disaster, which we know